I have a line from the English translation, and it says, Russian foreign policy is peaceful, open, predictable, consistent, and pragmatic. It doesn't seem to be.
The document says in very concrete terms that the West is waging a hybrid war of a new type against Russia. The main idea is to present Russia as an innocent victim.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Furnival. You are watching an OSW interview. Today I'll be talking to Dr Witold Rodkiewicz from OSW's Russian department. We'll be discussing Russia's new foreign policy concept. In March of this year, Russia published its new foreign policy concept. Why is it being published now, and why are they publishing a foreign policy concept?
Well, a foreign policy concept used to be a document that was pretty much ritualistic. Usually it was published at the beginning of the presidency, of the individual presidency. Medvedev published his own, and Putin published his in 2000. And when he came back in 2012, he published another one. But sometimes, and this is the case of 2016 document, it was published because there was a pretty radical change in Russia's position in the international system in relations with the West, basically after the occupation of the Crimea. So the radically new situation requires a new version of the foreign policy concept, which is kind of logical. And of course, Russia's situation, and one might say to a certain extent Russian policy, has changed dramatically with the start of the offensive, military offensive in February of last year against Ukraine. And that required a new document. In fact, they were talking about having a new concept just before the launch of the war, the start of the war, at the beginning of 2022. And apparently it was ready. They claimed they were just about to publish it. But then, of course, the war changed the situation, and it took them a year and a half to sort of figure out
how to present this reality. Because you said that this is in response to some changes in their foreign policy. So the war happened, but I have a line from the English translation, and it says, Russian foreign policy is peaceful, open, predictable, consistent, and pragmatic. It doesn't seem to be.
Well, this document has several purposes. One of them is, of course, a sort of PR. I mean, this is the image that Russia would like to present of itself. It's not a document in the sense that you would find a totally realistic description of Russia's policies. Very often quite the opposite. The point of the document is to mislead the opponents, to woo potential supporters, allies, to persuade those who are perhaps unconvinced. You will find a lot of statements, principles, which are completely opposite to what Russia really does. It's a masking exercise, one might say, as well.
Okay, but is it convincing? You say it's there to fool the opponents or to woo potential suitors, but it should be somehow realistic in that case. Is anybody really paying attention to it and believing it?
I think there are audiences in the West, especially in the so-called Global South, that are ready to accept some of the arguments that are presented, even if the arguments are false, or, to put it more precisely, are based on the assumptions that are completely false. Mm-hmm. It's very often not the arguments, but the assumptions behind. And even in Western societies, there are groups and there are people who would buy some of these arguments. So the main thrust of this document, one of the elements, basic elements, is its anti-American thrust.
And this is something reasonably new.
The extent of this is new. Previously, there were elements, or there were anti-Americanism of the documents of these previous iterations of the concepts was quite muted. It was there, but it was more of a hint than a direct and sort of vehement and sort of acerbic expression of anti-Americanism. And that has to do with the war. And that has also to do with the major shift in Russian policy that happened with the war, namely Russian strategy up to the war was based on this idea of having one's cake and being able to eat it too. That is, Russia was conducting, of course, anti-Western, anti-American policies designed to hurt American interests, to reduce American influence, to reduce Western influence. But at the same time, it wanted to maintain reasonably workable relations with the West because it was benefiting from them. So it wanted to enjoy all the benefits of cooperation with the West, while at the same time conducting anti-Western policy. It seems counterintuitive and kind of paradoxical, but that was the beauty of it. And only with the war, that pretensions were thrown overboard, and this document has this offensive, hard anti-Western thrust. But paradoxically, at the same time, it's claiming that Russia is not hostile to the West. It doesn't really have anything against the West as such, because one of the major, and this is a major shift. This is a new phenomenon. The main idea is to present Russia as an innocent victim. The entire picture that it paints is of Russia being under attack from the West. This is an attack which really is designed to destroy Russia.
Does this mean the sanctions or the Western influence in Ukraine?
Well, the document says specifically and in very concrete terms that the West is waging a hybrid war of a new type against Russia. Hence, Russia is defending itself, but more, it's defending the entire world, because allegedly Western policy is intent on imposing Western hegemony on the entire world and there is a kind of Marxism whiff to that, namely this policy is motivated by the desire to exploit the rest of the humanity in economic terms. This is colonial, hegemonic, and neo-colonial policy. This neo-colonial narrative appears for the first time in Russian foreign policy documents. And again, this is a function of, reflects Russian strategy to woo the global South in the conflict with the West, and appealing to anti-colonial feeling, to anti-Western feeling, anti-American feeling. And here, when you're asking about to what extent this is persuasive, yes, there is a demand for such rhetoric and for such policies in the global South.
You mentioned the new focus on the global South. What exactly does this mean, and is it overlapping or the same as BRICS?
To a large extent, yes, to a large extent, because all the other BRICS partners are from the global South. broadly speaking, because China is not really now regarded as part of global South because it's a new and upcoming superpower. So BRICS is a kind of institutional embodiment of the global South, and BRICS is mentioned in the document. And the emphasis in the document is that Russia has to replace its relations that it had with the West by or make up for the relations that it used to have with the West by developing more dynamically relations with first of all China, India. These two are mentioned separately, like these new coming up great powers. Asia-Pacific region, Islamic World, which is again a new thing in Russian foreign policy documents because and it's new and it's conceptually interesting because a civilization is being treated as a kind of political entity which is supposed to have specific foreign policy.
And the Islamic world, of course, overlaps with the territory of Russia.
Well, not necessarily. Russia claims that it has an Islamic component in its identity, but it's not.
So it's part of the Islamic world, in fact.
Well, it is and it's not. Russia is an observer at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Because it has a significant chunk of the population that is Muslim, probably 10%. I'm not sure, but it's significant enough so it can claim the observer status, but not sufficiently large to be a member. So Russia does not claim that it has that it's a Muslim, part of a Muslim civilization. No. And this is another interesting point and a new thing in the document. Russia there is defined as a state civilization, state-civilization. It's not clear what this is supposed to be, but it's a kind of emphasis, or in this way it emphasizes its sovereign status. So it is sovereign not only in legal sense and in the sense of being great power in terms of its potential, but also in a kind of civilizational and spiritual terms. It's a world apart. So in that sense, it's equal to other great civilizations, the European, or Western, the Chinese, the Muslim, Hindu, and so on and so on. So yes, this is again, this is a kind of exercise in having your cake and being able to eat it too. So you are part. You can claim that you are somewhat Islamic, but at the same time you are not. This allows you this rhetorical. Gives you room for maneuver rhetorically in terms of constructing narrative, in terms of appealing to different audiences. It gives you flexibility. It's an interesting and one might say inventive approach, inventive way to approach this.
So necessity is the mother of invention.
Well, yes, necessity is the mother of invention. One should not underestimate the extent to which imperial ambitions in terms of Russia's position in the world are the obsession of the Russian elite. So it's not a kind of a third or fourth issue in terms of their priority. It's significant segments of Russian elite that think about this all the time and kind of try to figure out how to.
But are we talking about the post-Soviet area, or?
Yes, we are talking about post-Soviet. Yeah, we are talking about post-Soviet times. I mean, if you were watching Russian debates on foreign policy, let's say in mid-90s, it was striking how it was taken for granted that Russia. I mean, the whole objective of the exercise of this process, intellectual process, and debates was to figure out how to regain the status of the great power again, because Russia at the same time claimed it was the great power, and at the same time there was this discussion: how are we to regain the position of the great power? Because there was some at the time there was a clear gap between aspirations and reality. The narrative was not very consistent; it was split, but it was a very telling way in it was in it seemingly contrary. Yes, it was inconsistent. Yeah, it was inconsistent, but it was a very if you accept why it was there, this was a very consistent inconsistency. One might put it this way.
So planned, perhaps.
No, it was natural in a way. To them, it was natural. One might say it was a kind of a plan designed. Was that by design? No, I think it was sort of natural. Very often, you could see how people didn't even see that there was some inconsistency in claiming at the same time that we are the great power, and we are great power because that's just the state of nature. This is natural. This is something this is our destiny.
1,000 years.
Yes, we are by nature of our history, our tradition, our size, our nuclear potential, and our seat in the Security Council. So these were usually quoted.
Well, I would like to ask particularly, so the nuclear status and the seat in the
Security Council,
the Permanent Security Council. These obviously show that Russia has some clout, definitely, but they are trying to promote themselves to, for example, the Global South. Do they have something genuine to offer?
There are two. I mean, you can answer that question.
Because in economic
one
terms,
is objectively, the other is sort of how they think about this. There is a lot of wishful thinking in that, but there is also a different philosophy about how the world works and what is important and what is valuable and what is perhaps not so valuable. Their gift to the world, to the third world or to the global south is that they are offering defense. They're offering defense, and so of course it depends how you interpret today's relations between the West and the global South. I would argue that with all the imbalances, there is nothing. The picture that Russia propaganda paints of Western hegemony and Western exploitation is simply, to put it mildly, an exaggeration, and it's completely false. I mean, if you look at the globalization, which was launched in the late 80s, it was the third world, third world became global South. And there was huge advances in economic well-being in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, everywhere. If you compare the standard of living, and of course the contrast is still there, and they are all. But so in that sense,
but surely some resentment came from this.
Yes, but this is at the same time, this is well known from sociology and from history. That resentment rises with it's not when the situation is the worst. It's when aspirations are becoming higher because your position improves. That if you look at revolutions, for example, the revolutions did not major revolutions, French, the English. The Russian Revolution didn't happen when the situation of the population, of the masses, was deteriorating. No, it was improving dramatically. But people were, the more the position was improving, the more they were unhappy, one might say. There are some analogies, I think, here. So they are offering. They are saying they are offering defense against the military superiority of the West. And by the way, the Western hegemony, if anything, does not rest now on any kind of military superiority. There are different mechanisms one might question. in economic governance, global economic governance, but it's the matter of bargaining, basically. And but Russia has a few things to offer, which are real. One, at least until the war, it's military equipment. Military advice.
So at least until the war, meaning it's less appealing.
Well, it's less because Russia is now so committed. The resources are highly committed. So, for example, we just learned a few weeks ago that Russians are not going to deliver the anti-aircraft missiles that they promised. Well, they're not going to fulfill the contract with India. Two last batches of S-400 surface-to-air missiles that were planned to be delivered by the end of this year would not be delivered. That was already officially announced. So it's the first major sign that perhaps Russia would find it hard to conduct a war and to be the kind of military supplier to its clients and friendly countries in the global south.
Chosen.
But so far, because especially in places like Africa, you don't need to provide a lot, and you don't need to provide things that are very sophisticated. You can provide relatively simple equipment, and the Russian equipment is cheap. What is even more important, I think, is that Russian offer includes expertise in the security area, and this is a kind of expertise that the West cannot provide because it includes pretty ruthless methods of fighting against guerrillas, against domestic opposition. So it's a kind of security package that is ready-made for potential dictators. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is attractive. We saw in places like Mali, in Central Africa, Sudan, now perhaps Burkina Faso. Elements of African elites find it very attractive, and the West cannot offer the same thing because simply it's not in this game. It can offer nuclear technology.
Russia?
Yes, Russia. It can offer space technology. So, for example, Angola placed its satellite with the help of Russian missile and help of Russian technology. So there is a narrow, highly technical, high-tech capabilities that Russia can offer. Now there's also food, grain, fertilizers. That's also very important for the global south. So there are these key assets or key resources, which are, if you look at the percentage of the foreign trade or the percentage of foreign aid, they are not that important, seemingly, but they are key in spite of being being relatively modest in size.
So Russia does have something in a limited way to offer to the global south, but it has definitely pivoted away from the West. Right. How important is this for the West? Should we really care about this?
I mean, it would be nice if we could have a cooperative relationship with Russia. It has resources to offer. If you look at the history of the last 30 years, I mean, it was not a coincidence that about 50% of Russia foreign trade was with the EU. It was mutually beneficial. But if you are having a committed enemy who is attacking with military force and with all kinds of hybrid warfare instruments, your neighbors, you, and it has clearly defined and clearly articulated and openly stated designs on your security, as it was clear from the documents and demands that Russia presented before it launched its operation against Ukraine. That was in December and January of 2021 and 2022. You don't have a choice. This is about the existence of Ukraine, and this is about absolutely fundamental rules of behavior in the international arena. I mean, you cannot have security for anyone if a great power is permitted to attack a neighbor, capture, annex territory, bomb cities. This makes it impossible and impractical to think in terms of, it would be nice to have a cooperative relationship. We have to accept the reality as it is, and we have to defend ourselves, deter Russia from attacking us, and be prepared for an attack. And in economic terms, again, we are in the phase of economic warfare. So still, it's a paradox because we're still buying a lot of goods from the Russian, for raw materials especially. But Russia is also buying, directly or indirectly, from the West. But this is not, sometimes people find it strange, but this is, if you look at history of warfare, this is not a unique situation. I can give you an example of 100 years war, which Netherlands fought against the Spanish Empire. It was again, existential war for Netherlands because they were fighting their own independence. At the same time, Spain was the major or the largest economic partner of the Dutch, and the Dutch played a vital role in the economy of the Spanish Empire. Without the Dutch ships, the Spanish could not bring goods from Latin America, from its colonies in Latin America. So the sides traded with each other, or rather used each other's services, while at the same time waging a bloody, and it was a bloody, vicious war, because it had also a religious element. This was Catholic counter-Reformation Spanish Empire fighting against the heretics in the Netherlands. So there were major atrocities committed against civilians, which was somewhat normal in 17th, 16th century warfare, nevertheless. So this economic symbiosis doesn't preclude bloody warfare, unfortunately.
Okay, so, we can certainly hope that this particular conflict doesn't last 100 years, but some cooperation will continue regardless. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this interview. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe.